Stand firm, die well, for the Imperium shall not kneel. These were the last recorded words of Valader, moments before the void swallowed him whole in a firestorm of righteous defiance. His death, though tragic, was but a whisper in the greater storm to come. And as the ancient maxim reminds us, there is no sweeter victory than to let your foes devour one another. Hail, sons and daughters of the throne, you who endure the darkness so that the light of the Emperor may burn ever brighter. Know this, what you are about to learn is not a tale of triumph, nor one of redemption. It is a tale carved in blood and shadow, a dire record of the ruinous confrontation between the spectral Eldar of Craftworld Iyanden and the abominable Hive Fleet Kraken. Steady your hearts, for the truth is not gentle. It does not comfortable. It hurts. But in this age of ending, pain is a teacher and knowledge is a blade. You have not been chosen for your comfort. You have been chosen because you must endure, because the weight of this truth cannot fall upon weak shoulders. You will bear witness, in the name of him on earth, to what transpired in the doomed system of Valader. Ave Imperator. He watches, he judges, he protects. Let the chronicle commence. When Hive Fleet Kraken tore through the eastern fringe like a spear through flesh, its arrival shook even the most ancient stars. The Eldar, those aloof architects of fate, cloaked in prophecy, felt the tremors before most. Their farcers wept visions of blood and ruin, crying out to a cosmos that would not answer. They had foreseen the Devourers coming in dreams and in death, but never with such ferocity. Even they were unprepared. Even they blinked. The usual stratagems, illusion, deception, withdrawal, were as ineffective as whispers in a void storm. Against this foe, nothing stood. The Tyranids were not an army to defeat, but a hunger to outlast. A hunger that consumed the very fabric of existence. Stars died in silence as worlds were reduced to ash and slurry. The Eldar, masters of elegance and precision, found themselves hunted, cornered, desperate. And the younger races? The Tau barely warranted mention. A candle flickering before a tsunami. As for the Imperium, it responded as it always has, with fire, with fury, with legions of the damned. Billions of lives offered on the altar of attrition. The great devourer, ever ravenous, merely opened wider. Each fallen guardsman, each shattered tank, each obliterated outpost, they were all nourishment. Not in vain, perhaps, but not in victory. For the Tyranids adapt. They consume. They evolve. Every defeat is data. Every corpse, a blueprint. From the rotting flesh of their enemies, they birth new monstrosities, sharper, faster, more precise in their butchery. A war against the hive mind is not a contest of armies. It is a race against time. It was this cycle, the Ouroboros of consumption and rebirth, that the Eldar sought to end. In the Valader system, they gambled everything. Iyanden's war hosts descended not as saviors, but as surgeons, intent on excising the infection before it could spread any further. They knew what would come if the swarm breached Valader, death without end, a silence where once were stars. But in their desperation, they underestimated the cost. The battle for Valader did not unfold across trenches or cityscapes. It was waged in the skies, in the warp, in the very bones of the world. It was a war of extinction, without mercy or morality. And in the final hour, when there remained no other recourse, the Eldar made a decision that would echo across time. They shattered the planet of Doriel, a world once green, once vibrant, sacrificed, burned to ash to deny the swarm its prize. This is not a tale of victory. This is a dirge for the damned, a testament to what it takes to hold the line in a galaxy that does not care who lives or who dies. The fall of Valader was not the end. It was merely the beginning. They are the architects of annihilation. The Norn queens, malignant intellects buried deep within the bowels of Tyranid bioships, are the unsleeping minds behind the swarm's endless hunger. With every encounter, they twist failure into adaptation, defeat into evolution. Each lost beast is a lesson learned. Every slain enemy adds another weapon to their grotesque arsenal. They are not creatures. They are processes, algorithms of destruction. And in them, the Eldar see something horrifyingly familiar. To the minds of the ancient Eldari, the Tyranids are not merely invaders. They are the living myth of the world dragon made manifest. a being of pure consumption, prophesied to unmake all things. They are the end that dreams in shadow, the final chapter written in chitin and claw. The Eldar, as ever, stand apart, proud, isolated, arrogant. Yet, when the stars begin to dim and the warp trembles at the approach of the great devourer, even they must act. They alone understand what is truly at stake. They do not fight for dominion or glory, but because they know a terrible truth. If they do not stand against this horror, no one else can. But knowledge is not strength without action. And here, the Eldar falter. Their numbers, once vast, now dwindle with each passing millennium. Time has not been kind. Every soul lost is irreplaceable. Every battle fought is another toll paid from a debt already too great. And the Tyranids? They are infinite, limitless, a storm without end, a hunger with no bottom. Among those who foresaw this doom was Teek Silveri, a farser of Iyanden, gifted, brilliant, and cursed with clarity. He spoke of tendrils in the dark, of a creeping void that would swallow suns. His visions were sharp, his warnings dire, and as with all true prophets, he was met with disbelief. If only they had listened, but they did not, and so Iyanden fell, not to the full fury of the hive mind, no. It took only a single tendril, one exploratory appendage of hive flea kraken, to breach the gates. That was enough. It did not come with drums of war. It came like cancer, silently, swiftly, and by the time Iyanden's defenders stirred to meet the threat, the enemy was already inside. The craft world, once a sanctuary of light and artistry, a fortress of Eldar pride, was reduced to a drifting carcass. Its soul forests burned, its domes shattered, its halls overrun with nightmare. In their desperation, the living turned to the dead. From the infinity circuit, the spirits of the fallen were summoned, torn from their long slumber and bound into wraith constructs, lumbering avatars of memory and vengeance. With their spectral ancestors at their side, the defenders of Iyanden made their stand. The Tyranids came not just to kill, but to erase. The Eldar answered with echoes of those long past. This was the measure of the threat, not survival, continuity, not life, but memory preserved through fire and blood. Where Hive Fleet Behemoth had once thundered forward like a hammer, Kraken struck like a needle. It spread out across the stars in surgical strands, seeking weakness, probing, tasting. Its attacks were coordinated, precise, like a scalpel peeling open the arteries of the galaxy. Iyanden, bleeding and cornered, seemed doomed. Until, at last, salvation came from the void. Prince Uriel, the long-exiled son of Iyanden, returned in fire and wrath at the helm of his corsair fleet. With blinding speed and merciless resolve, he struck the heart of the swarm. Joined by battered Imperial remnants entrenched on the blasted ruins of Ik-6, Uriel unleashed a counterattack the hive mind could not anticipate. The tide turned. Kraken's central tendril was sundered, its cohesion fractured, the swarm scattered. Iyanden, against all logic and expectation, endured. But the price was ruin. The craft world stood, yes, but only just. And the surviving Eldar knew this was no victory. The swarm had not been destroyed, only delayed. The shattered fragments of Kraken drifted through the void, still hunting, still feeding, still remembering. If they returned, and they would, Iyanden would not survive a second time. So the Farsers made a final, unthinkable choice. They turned to that which all Eldar fear. They turned to sorcery. Through a ritual as ancient as it was forbidden, the survivors gathered their anguish, centuries of sorrow, rage, and loss, and poured it into the infinity circuit. This wasn't a spell. It was a scream, a weapon forged from despair. The pain of the entire craft world became a beacon, sharpened to a psychic knife that stabbed through reality. The veil between dimensions tore asunder. From the wound bloomed a storm, not of water or flame, but of souls. A warp storm, born of grief, now shields the remnants of Iyanden in a maelstrom of agony. It is not sanctuary. It is purgatory. But it is enough for now. And so Iyanden remains, wounded, haunted, waiting. The dead walk its halls. The stars around it are silent. And the seers know this respite will not last, because the devourer remembers. And it is always hungry. It was not a victory. It was an escape. When Iyanden tore open the fabric of reality and birthed a psychic tempest, the lesser tendrils of Hive Fleet Kraken recoiled, as if struck by a god's wrath. The yawning warp rift, a wound in space itself, was too vile, too unnatural even for them. Most broke away, turning their bioships and fleeing into the dark. Most, but not all. One splinter of Kraken, caught too close to the vortex, had no such fortune. It writhed in instinctive terror, its synaptic links snapping one by one. It fought to pull free, clawed at the void with spiked hulls and living engines, but there is no resisting the Imperium. It was devoured, dragged screaming into unreality. A predator consumed by the greater predator of the warp. But the Eldar did not watch its end. They did not cheer. There was no joy to be found in vengeance, no triumph in annihilation. Iyanden still drifted, broken, bleeding, but intact. Alive. For now. Their survival came at an impossible cost. A world ship held aloft by ghosts. A people standing not on victory, but on the bones of their ancestors. Souls borrowed from the past, paid forward in blood. The rift they created had saved them, but it had scarred the galaxy. And scars, like all wounds, fester. To the Eldar, the warp is not merely a dimension. It is a place of memory, pain, and divine punishment. To tear it open so violently was unthinkable. Every craft world bore ancient laws forbidding such acts. But desperation had made outlaws of them all. They had broken the stars to survive. And the stars would remember. For the warp does not forget. It broods. It hungers. It waits. The gods that dwell within, those twisted entities born of thought, madness, and suffering, sense the wound. And they marked those who had made it. A price had been paid to escape the jaws of Kraken, but a greater debt remained. Still, among the Eldar, there were some who found satisfaction in the act. To cast the tyrannid swarm into a demonic abyss, to turn the devourer into the devoured, it was cruel. It was beautiful. It was justice. But justice in this galaxy is never clean. The threat of Hive Fleet Kraken was not ended, only scattered. And what Iyanden had faced was merely the beginning. The truth loomed ever larger. This was not just a battle, not a war. This was an extinction event unfolding in real time. The great devourer would return. It must. It always does. Time passed. Years slipped by in silence and unease. The wounds inflicted by Kraken did not heal. They festered in the soul of the craft world. Deep within the Infinity Circuit, echoes of that terrible conflict still reverberated like distant screams. The dead did not rest easy. And then the visions returned. Farser Teak Silveri, once mocked and dismissed, had become a revered, if haunted, voice in Iyanden's halls. Vindicated by prophecy, he now spoke with solemn urgency. His new visions were fractured, disjointed, like shards of a mirror reflecting a future too terrible to comprehend. He spoke of a darkness rising beyond known space. Of tyrannids, yes, but not as they were. Changed, reborn, infused with something older. The High Council of Seers listened, truly listened, for the first time. They summoned Spirit Seer Iana Rini, a mystic of extraordinary will and psychic sensitivity, and tasked her with untangling the knot of fate. Iana gathered the runes. She entered the trance. She descended into the skeins of destiny, threading her mind through tangled futures and bleeding memories. And what she found chilled even the oldest among them. The Tyranids had changed. Within the shadowed layers of possibility, Iana uncovered revelation. Those Tyranid organisms that had once torn through Iyanden's halls now bore more than just physical memory. They carried psychic echoes of the craft world itself. Imprints, residues, a haunting trace of every Eldar mind they had devoured. The hive mind had tasted Iyanden, and it remembered the flavor. To most psychers, this trace would be undetectable, a ghost of a ghost. But to Iyanden's spirit seers, whose lives are spent walking with the dead, it blazed like a star. They saw it, they felt it, and they understood the truth. The Tyranids had not simply fed on flesh, they had fed on souls. What had once been a swarm had now become something far worse, a psychic hybrid, infused with the essence of its prey. In some terrible alchemy of the warp and the mind, the splinter of Kraken lost in the rift had changed. It had become a creature of nightmare, shaped by both evolution and the warp's madness. Somewhere in the void, it still lived, twisted, dormant, waiting to return. The Eldar had cast their enemy into the storm, but something else had crawled back out. They searched the void like hunters chasing the echo of a ghost. Guided by the Farseers, Iyondan's most gifted spirit seers reached deep into the immaterial, feeling, not seeing. The scars left in the warp. Every tremor, every psychic reverberation in the galactic veil narrowed their pursuit. It was a ritual of unrelenting focus and perilous clarity, performed in silence save for the haunting hum of soulstones and the whispered echoes of ancient chants. Then, with a final surge of revelation, the ritual ended, and every spirit seer recoiled as if struck by lightning. The truth was worse than fear, worse than prophecy. The Tyranid splinter fleet they had cast into the warp, they had not died, nor had they become stranded, tumbling endlessly in some corner of the Imperium, like wandering ghosts. No, they had returned, spewed forth from the warp like vomit from a sickened god. They had emerged in a forgotten, cursed sector, the vortex of despair, a place where warp storms never ceased and stars died screaming. But that horror was only the prelude, for the bio fleet had not simply emerged. It was moving, and its course, drawn by instinct or something darker, pointed toward a war zone already ravaged by the gluttonous horror of High Fleet Leviathan. Leviathan, the galaxy's most recent wound, the most ravenous Tyranid fleet, yet known to the races of the stars. It had fed on the meat of 100 Imperial worlds, torn through the defenses of Segmentum Tempestus, like a blade through silk, and plunged headlong into the Orc Empire of Octarius, drawn there by cunning Imperial manipulation and the promise of endless war. The Orcs had welcomed the fight with open jaws and thunderous roars. Leviathan had answered not with fury, but with cold, surgical precision. And still neither side broke. The Imperium had believed it clever, luring the swarm into the endless brawl of Octarius. They had believed they could drown the Tyranids in green blood. They were wrong. And now, a greater terror loomed on the edge of perception. Kraken and Leviathan were converging, not by chance, by fate, by hunger, by something deeper still. The Farseers saw the convergence not as a battle, but as a communion. Two strands of biological genius, one refined by the psychic depth and arcane minds of the Eldar, the other tempered in the unrelenting crucible of orcish brutality, on the brink of fusing into something wholly new. A superorganism, a predator god, a biological apocalypse incarnate. If this union occurred, the consequences would be beyond calculation. The new swarm would carry within it the cunning of the Eldar mind, the raw savagery of the orcs, and the cold adaptability of the Tyranids. It would be evolution given purpose, death with intent. It would be the end. No alliance would stop it. No army could match it. Not the Imperium's endless tide of men. Not the Orcs' feral rage. Not even the psychic might of the Eldar. Nothing. And so, Iyondan prepared for war once more. Without allies. Without reinforcements. Without hope. Not because they sought glory. Not because they believed in victory. But because someone had to stand, even in the face of extinction. Somewhere within the fleshy hearts of the Tyranid broodships, something monstrous was stirring. Enfolded in membranous sacs of bone and sinew, incubated in pools of enzymatic bile, a new breed took shape. One not born of mere mutation, but forged with intent. Behemoths with towering limbs and elongated skulls. Creatures whose thoughts pulsed with stolen echoes of Eldar brilliance, and whose sinews remembered the battles of Orc warlords. This was not natural selection. This was war made flesh. And the stage upon which this final metamorphosis would unfold was Daryl. Daryl, jewel of the southern stars. A planet sculpted in the age of glory, when the Eldar still walked among suns like gods. Its skies, painted in lilac fire. Its oceans, crystalline and infinite. Its lands, lush with bioluminescent forests and whispering winds. A place not born, but crafted, down to the arc of its moons and the rhythms of its tides. It had been a paradise. Now it would become an altar of war, an altar of sacrifice, and perhaps, if the Eldar failed, an altar of extinction. To the Eldar, the world was not called Daryl. They named it Lambent Flame, a title sung with reverence in the crystal cathedrals of spirit seers and etched into the wraithbone vaults of their long-lost archives. It was not merely a planet. It was a place of soul-deep meaning, a sanctuary sculpted by their ancestors in an age when stars bent to Eldar will. But now that flame was faltering. Iana Arini, spirit seer of Iyanden and bearer of the dead Silent Council, saw the truth first. She listened not only to the whispers of departed souls, but to the riddled visions of Farser Teak Silveri, whose mind had brushed the edge of time itself. In his dreams, a candle guttered beneath monstrous wings, and a final breath passed beneath a sunless sky. To Iana, there could be no doubt. Lambent Flame was dying. Summoned by her urgency, the High Council of Seers gathered in solemn gravity. Circles of runes were cast, soulstones dimmed, and an oppressive hush fell across the chamber. What came next was not a vision, but an unraveling, a peeling back of futures. What they witnessed froze their breath and chilled their infinite souls. Daryl, this jewel of ancient grace, had not merely fallen. It had been desecrated, devoured, and doomed. 10,000 years ago, the fall of the Eldar had sent out a psychic detonation that echoed through reality. On Daryl, the shockwave was apocalyptic. Its guardians, those bound to protect its sacred skies, were obliterated in body and spirit, their souls ripped from existence and devoured by the dark thirst of she who must never be named. Nothing remained but echoes. But Eldar craftsmanship defies time. When the Imperium arrived centuries later, they found not ruins, but skeletons of splendor. Wraithbone towers still pierced the clouds like pale thorns of defiance. Gardens of crystal still glittered beneath drifting ash. To the Monkey, it was an offense, a heresy carved in stone. So they did what humans always do. They built, they burned, they erased. Cathedrals rose where moon pools once shimmered. Fortresses were stamped atop sacred groves, and the bones of the Eldar were ground into dust to mix with the mortar of Imperial ambition. Over decades, Daryl became yet another cog in the faceless, grinding machinery of the Imperium, until its skies choked on smog, its seas died, and its spirit was silenced beneath Ferrocrete in fire. But cruelty has layers, for after millennia of neglect and centuries of conquest, the planet's punishment was not yet complete. Then the skies split. Then the Tyranids came. High Fleet Leviathan, glutted on biomass, sharpened by war, descended like a planetary execution. Spore pods fell like rain. Defense grids folded within hours. Cities became mulch. The Imperium's garrisons fought and died in futility. Billions were consumed. And even then, the worst was yet to come. From the far reaches of cursed space, drawn from the vortex of despair, something darker approached. A revenant, a hunger that had touched the Eldar before and had never forgotten the taste. High Fleet Kraken, reborn, twisted, changed. The rift had not ended it. The warp had not slain it. It had remade it. Now, this aberrant tendril of Kraken sailed toward Daryl with precision and purpose, as if guided by some malign, unseen hand. The auguries confirmed the impossible. This was not coincidence. This was design. Whether by fate or some dark puppet master, Kraken and Leviathan were converging on Daryl. And if they met, if their strands of evolution braided together amidst the planetary ruins of Eldar pride and human defilement, a new apex predator would be born. A strain forged not through time, but through necessity, with the Eldar's psychic echoes still burning within its cells, and the Orc's brutal resistance stamped into its genome. A biological singularity. A death god made flesh. The Eldar could not allow this future to manifest. But time had already betrayed them. Iyanden, scarred from past wars, could not move fast enough. Even through the shattered arteries of the webway, they would arrive too late. The convergence would come and pass. The nightmare would be born. There was only one chance left. Craftworld Bertan, an elusive and fierce fragment of the Eldar diaspora. Bertan was guided not by politics or prophecy, but by vengeance. Drifting alone among the stars, it had long severed ties with its kin. But Iyanden sent a plea. Desperate, honest. Bertan hesitated. Daryl was not their world. This was not their war. Then Iona Irene sent a single word through the void. Extermination. It was enough. Bertin turned its great prow toward Daryl. It did not speak. It did not promise. But it prepared. A frontal assault through real space would be suicide. Two hive fleets loomed like titanic jaws, and any conventional approach would see Bertin crushed between them. So the seers of Bertin looked inward, to ancient tunnels long sealed, to forgotten gates carved into Daryl's mountains, shrouded in myth and memory. The webway stirred, and from the gates of bone and light, the sword wind descended. They came not as soldiers, but as wrath incarnate. Graph tanks glided across blackened plains. Jet bikes shrieked over canyons, where once crystal rivers ran. Waves of aspect warriors, clad in vibrant death, emerged like living avatars of vengeance. They did not come to save Daryl. They came to avenge it. Above, clouds roiled. Beneath, the Tyranid swarms feasted. Between them, the Eldar fell like lightning. This was no battle. This was a reckoning. Above Daryl, the skies wept ash. Once a paradise sculpted by Eldar grace, the world now groaned beneath layers of alien decay. What remained of its atmosphere clung to the highlands in choking banks of spore-laced mist, not fog, but the breath of the hive. The air shimmered with unseen toxins. The wind stank of rot and ammonia. Into this cauldron of extinction drifted the war hosts of Craftworld Baelton, silent as starlight, precise as death. Their graphcraft moved with an eerie elegance, slicing through the veils of gas and formations so perfect they seemed choreographed by fate itself. Falcons glided like hawks across a dying sky. Wave serpents pulsed with restrained violence. And higher still, the crimson silhouettes of crimson hunters spun between the clouds, tracing invisible wards of vengeance across the heavens. They were not seen. They were not meant to be. By nightfall, they had surrounded the globe, an unseen lattice of vengeance poised in orbit and atmosphere, waiting for the moment to strike. The Tyranids, for all their monstrous intellect, were blind to it. Bound by hunger and instinct, they crawled over Daryl's carcass in ignorance, drawn inexorably toward one another. Two titanic swarms. Leviathan, swollen on the biomass of corrupted forests, swollen beasts pulsing with stolen energy. And Kraken, slithering from the horizon like a tide of knives, its beasts leaner, faster, reborn in the shadow of the warp. They were not allies. They were competitors. Predators converging on the same corpse. And if they merged, if their strains intermingled, it would be the dawn of a new breed. A nightmare tailored not by time, but by necessity. A weapon. A monster. An extinction event with claws. That could not be allowed. Baelton acted. The mist above the Valley of the Gods split in two as grav engines howled, and war song blared from runic relays. The sword wind descended, not as an army, but as a divine calamity. Waves of jet bikes tore from the clouds, streaking like comets. Pulsars and scatter lasers lit the sky with starfire. Falcons dropped from orbit like thunderbolts, their underslung cannons raining molten death into the tide below. Below, the swarm screamed, not with voices, but with thought. Psychic agony rippled through the hive mind as hundreds, then thousands, of bioforms were torn asunder in seconds. Shuriken catapults sang their whining dirge, cleaving limbs and carapace in a ceaseless rhythm. The Tyranids buckled. Caught mid-march, their instinct faltered. They fled into what remained of Daryl's forests, forests now more fungal rot than flora, stalked by the ghosts of trees and the ruins of alien machines. But the Eldar gave no quarter. Aspect warriors fell like thunderbirds from the skies. Dire avengers, gleaming in azure death, cut swathes through termagant clusters. Howling banshees screamed across the ridgebacks, blades flickering like lightning strikes. Fire dragons moved with eerie calm, targeting larger beasts, carnifexes, tervigons, even trigons, with precision honed across 1,000 war zones. Fusion fire turned monstrous flesh to slag. Wraithbone war masks turned calm faces toward carnage. Above all, upon God Peak, stood Sunspear. Autarch Lok Sunspear, commander of this vengeance, watched the battle unfold like a sculptor before unfinished marble. His eyes, enhanced by millennia of combat discipline, saw not chaos, but flow. Pressure points. Fractures. places where a single order could crack an entire front. His voice came across the command web calm and crisp. Now, and the night erupted. Dark Reapers stepped into firing stance, their Reaper launchers howling like wailing banshees of myth. Storms of missiles fell upon the Synapse beasts, coordinating the enemy's resistance. Neurothropes, Tyranid primes, warrior commanders, all targeted with ruthless precision. With each death, a chord in the hive mind snapped. War walkers emerged from the fog on long, insectal legs, their bright lances burning through psychic shields like knives through parchment. Zoanthropes fell, screeching, their overloaded minds detonating in blasts of Empyrean energy. Swooping hawks rained grenades from above, dancing between spore trees like birds aflame. Still the Eldar pressed on. And then, the god of war arrived. The avatar of Kine, flame-wreathed, impossibly vast, strode into the heart of the swarm. Sword blazing like the core of a dying star, it cleaved monsters as though they were air. Brood lords charged, and were torn apart. Warriors swarmed, and were incinerated. The earth cracked beneath its wrath. The sky wept cinders. This was not war. This was a ritual, a sacrifice, and the Tyranids were the offering. Sunspear's plan reached its apex. With the synaptic lattice fractured, Kraken reeled. Its warriors turned on one another. Creatures screamed into the void. What was once a spear of biological purpose now became a storm of madness. The link between Kraken and Leviathan, never yet forged, was broken before it began. Victory. For a breath, the Eldar stood on the edge of hope. But the galaxy breathes in blood, and hope is its first casualty. Kraken, though shattered, had not died. It learned. It adapted. Scattered bioforms slithered away from battle like oil-down stone. Ravagers burrowed into ash-soft hills. Lictors vanished into the wreckage of cathedrals. Gaunts nested beneath the skeletons of ancient trees. The war was not over. The Eldar pursued. Striking scorpions flickered between shadows. Emerald ghosts with blades like whispers. Warp spiders danced through dimensions, leaving threads of death in their wake. And still the Tyranids slipped away. They did not fight. They waited. They watched. They had tasted Eldar minds before. They would again. The sword wind had struck swift and true. They had cleaved the swarm. But they had not struck fast enough. The great devourer endures. And beneath Dariel's wounded skies, it waits, evolving. Far to the east, the sky betrayed them. At first, it was only a bruise on the horizon, a distant ripple of darkness, shifting against the dying light. Eldar eyes, honed by millennia of war, mistook it for storm clouds swelling over the bones of Darrell. But the winds whispered no warnings, and the clouds did not drift, they pulsed. They churned, they hunted, and then they moved. The Viper Outriders saw the truth too late. A single word echoed across the war host's communications, net like a crack of doom. Leviathan. The nightmare had only just begun. The sky collapsed. From the eastern horizon, a living storm unfurled. Tens of thousands of gargoyles poured across the firmament, living blades with wings of tattered sinew, screeching a chorus of hunger. They blackened the sun. They drowned the world in shadow. From cliffside vantage points, the Aspect warriors stood in solemn silence, watching the madness gather. A new front of war. A new face of death. Cloudstrike squadrons scrambled from above, their grav engines burning arcs through the darkness. Lances of fire speared the heavens. Alien flesh ignited and fell in trails of smoke. Yet the void-born tide did not falter. It surged, infinite and inevitable. And then it struck. A thunderclap of bodies crashed over the Eldar lines. A hurricane of claws and bone and teeth. Defense formations collapsed beneath sheer weight. Dire avengers and howling banshees were overwhelmed in seconds, their grace lost amid the chaos. Screams rippled across the mesas, and shuriken fire howled in desperation. Wave serpents dropped to extract survivors, glimmering lifeboats in a sea of ruin. But even within their sleek hulls, there was no sanctuary. Leviathan's swarm followed. They bled into the transports. Flesh boars punched through armor. Razor-winged beetles poured in through vents. Maggot-like parasites burrowed into screaming bodies. The hatches sealed. The killing began anew inside. In those tight metal tombs, battle became massacre. Swords clashed against bone and bile, but no amount of skill could halt the tide. The Eldar within died surrounded, not by comrades, but by the monsters that hunted their extinction. On the broken plateaus, resistance burned bright, and then it burned out. The heaviest war engines of Bealtan stood their ground. War walkers advanced, Wraith Lords ignited their ghost cores, and Wraith Knights leveled their shields, but it was not enough. From the storm descended Herodins, titanic beasts of muscle and malice, wings wide enough to eclipse the battlefield. One by one, they seized war walkers in their talons and hurled them against the cliffs of Gapik, shattering them like relics made of glass. And the sky screamed back. Harpies and hive crones joined the slaughter. Acid bile and spore bombs turned rock to sludge and wraithbone to ash. Hive tyrants flew in behind them, surrounded by clouds of shrieking gargoyles, their psychic fury cracking open helmets and bursting minds in firestorms of agony. Even the avatar of Kain, he who had strode through Kraken's ranks like a god reborn, was swallowed by the living avalanche. Beneath writhing heaps of chitin and talon, the fire dimmed. His sword flared once, twice, then vanished beneath the mountain of bodies. Gods could fall, and the Eldar knew despair. From the heights of Gapik, Autarch Sunspear watched the unmaking of his design. Below, what was once a carefully orchestrated theater of war had become a burial ground. His strategy had depended on speed, precision, and surprise, on ending the conflict before Leviathan awoke. But Leviathan was awake, and it had brought the storm. His soul, old and sharpened by centuries of conflict, weighed the cost. And so, he whispered the words no Eldar commander wished to speak. Total withdrawal. Fall back to the webway. The sword wind had faltered. In the aftermath, victory was a hollow word. Kraken, wounded, had survived. Leviathan, enraged, had arrived. And the Eldar? They had escaped, but barely. On the crystalline decks of Craftworld Bealtan, the returning Autarchs did not speak. Their blades were clean. Their war helms were removed. But their eyes, ancient, luminous, held the weight of failure. The Farcers awaited them in silence. No song marked their return. No runes of triumph were cast. No king came forward to embrace them. Only the truth was spoken. Liondan is on its way. Too far. Too slow. Too late. Even should the ghost walkers of Iyanden reach Dariel through the hidden corridors of the webway, it would not change what had become clear to all. This war would not be won by might alone, not by wraith blades or strategy, not by gods or flame, for the Farcers had seen it before the first blade was drawn. In the shifting dance of runes and fate, they had glimpsed a shape not yet born, the hunger that could not be slain. They had known. This was not a war to be won. It was a storm to be survived. For every beast they struck down, 1,000 more stirred in the black between stars. Bioships the size of cities loomed in orbit. Spore pods rained down like seeds of apocalypse. Each cycle fed the next. To fight the Tyranids was to strike at a flood with a sword. To resist was noble, but futile. And still they resisted, because that is what it means to be Eldar. To face oblivion with elegance. To wage hopeless war in the name of art, memory, and vengeance. The notion of cleansing Doriel's surface in a blazing inferno, the favorite hammer of the Imperium's blunt strategists, was dismissed outright, not for lack of power, but because flame could never reach the horrors buried deep beneath the planet's crust. There, nestled in dark wombs of rock and flesh, vast broods of biomonsters lay in waiting, cocooned by the very bones of Doriel itself. No matter how searing the fire, it would merely scar the skin of the world, leaving the venomous heart untouched. What was required was something far more absolute. Annihilation. Not mere purging, but true, utter erasure. To rend the planet's core asunder. To shatter its bones and rend its flesh. To crush it into silence and ash. In ages past, the Eldar had wielded such cataclysmic force as easily as breath. Cosmic emperors whose wars were written in supernovae and sung across the stars. But those days were legends now, memories painted in starlight and shadow. The mighty Quarth world of old was gone, its titanic strength faded to myth. Bealtan could fight and burn and strike with precision unmatched, But to obliterate a world with a single stroke? Such devastation was a ghost of the past. Within the crystalline sanctum of the dome of crystal seers, the farcers gathered. Their hands wove intricate patterns in the air, tracing runes older than memory itself. The glowing symbols of Biltan and Iandin circled warily, drawn toward a cluster of ominous glyphs, portents of ruin, despair, and endless night. Yet amid the doom, a solitary rune pulsed with eerie clarity. Linathanto Clava, the knife that stays the blade. A symbol long abandoned, a path shunned by Eldar pride and honor. It was a sign, a whisper of desperation. This was no call to glory. It was a plea for survival, and it pointed to the one place where honor dared not tread Kamarak, the nightmare city carved from agony and treachery, the domain of the Drakari, the Dark Eldar. To seek their aid was to walk the razor's edge with shadow itself. Yet the rune spoke true. Time was running out, just barely. Among the War Council, only one could claim to have walked the labyrinthine spires of Kamarak and lived to tell the tale. Autarch Ordhak's Sunspear. He bore the scars of that infernal place deep within his spirit, wounds unseen, yet unhealed. He remembered the shifting webs of power and pain, the twisted gates of the webway that bound mind and memory alike. One fragile thread, fragile, shifting, perilous, might yet lead them to the Dark City. But the journey was not without peril. Many gates were metaphysical prisons, doors that changed with thought, emotion, and past regrets. A step forward could be a descent into madness. Sunspear summoned the High Council once more, his voice calm but resolute. No delegation of the Sword Wind can survive the shadows of Kamarak, not as warriors, nor as envoys. The Drakari will hunt us for sport before a single word is spoken. But there was another way. A slender, treacherous hope. Without a word, Sunspear crossed the verdant, soaring garden spires of Biltan to the amphitheater of echoes, a sanctuary of myth and memory. At its summit hung a delicate porcelain mask, split eternally between laughter and sorrow. Half a smile, half a tear. Slowly, reverently, Sunspear removed the mask. It shattered on the stage. From the splintered shards erupted pillars of prismatic light, coalescing into shimmering forms, harlequins, Eldar of legend and madness, children of the laughing god, dancers clad in kaleidoscopic war. Sunspear knelt before them, speaking in the ancient tongue of Eldarith, dead to most craftworlders, but alive in the myths of the past. He told them of Iandin's fall, of Doriel's battle, and the terrible convergence of high fleets. The Harlequins listened, their faces masks of sorrow and delight. Then the lead figure bowed, slow and mocking, with the grace of tragedy. Acceptance. In a whirlwind of color and light, they vanished. The shards lay still once more. Sunspear rose and turned to the stunned council. "We ride to war again," he said, voice steady, "but not as we have before." The gamble had paid. Within a single cycle, Biltan's war fleet stood arrayed around the webway gate to Doriel, no longer alone. Sleek, jagged ships of obsidian and crimson sailed beside them, predatory and cruel. Drakari vessels. The Dark Eldar had answered the call. Sunspear spoke not of the price paid. He did not need to. The Harlequins had brokered their dark accord in eerie silence. Through cryptic gestures and haunting performances, they had pried open the shadowed gates of Kamarak itself. From the abyss emerged the Dark Eldar, like hunters slipping from the void, grinning with cruel amusement and armed with death's sharpest tools. Their leader stepped forward with theatrical flair, his smile stretched unervingly across a gaunt, weathered face. He called himself Lord Sarnak, his voice as smooth and slippery as obsidian oil, claiming allegiance directly from Asdrabeel Vecht, the immortal overlord of the Dark City. Sarnak bore the sigils of the dreaded cabal of the Black Heart, a name whispered in dread even among the cruelest denizens of Kamarak. 10 cycles passed in tense negotiation, a dance of barbed words and veiled threats. Slowly, an uneasy understanding crystallized between Sunspear and Sarnak. Not friendship, for such a thing was beyond reach, but a shared recognition of mutual need. Together, they readied themselves to return to Doriel. But this time, there would be no hope of salvation. There would only be destruction. Lord Sarnak had brought more than words. Behind him surged a force that sent tremors through the ancient halls of Bealtan itself. Half of the notorious, which cults of strife rode the void with lethal grace. A deadly ballet of razor blades and savage elegance descending upon the battlefield like a storm of living death. Yet, for all their ruthless beauty, these were but shadows to the true prize that the Harlequin's perilous bargain had secured. No, the greatest treasure, hidden deep within the venomous heart of Kamarak, was a weapon of unfathomable terror. The Fire Heart, a psychic doomsday engine attuned to the very pulse of planetary cores. This massive nodal resonator could be plunged into the molten veins of a world to rip its heart apart from within. With a single catastrophic ritual, the Fire Heart would unleash a cataclysm, turning tectonic plates into writhing chaos, rupturing the crust in rivers of flame and molten fury. An entire biosphere incinerated, erased without mercy. For Bealtan, the Fire Heart was a desperate solution, a way to purge Doriel's infestation utterly, to strike at the root of the Tyranid menace. For the Drakari, however, it was a relic of forbidden lore, a curiosity cloaked in dread. They had long abandoned such psychic horrors, fearing the slightest warp disturbance might summon the gaze of their eternal predator. She who thirsts, the insatiable Slainish. With cruel satisfaction, Lord Sarnak revealed the true cost of this dread weapon, before a shimmering hollow projection, linking him directly to Sunspear and the Eldar High Council. He grinned, a skull with living lips, and whispered, "The Fire Heart cannot be triggered from afar." Its activation demanded a ritual performed in the very belly of the beast, on the scorched surface of Doriel itself. A circle of Eldar seers would need to bind their minds, anchoring the psychic rite through sheer force of will until the core shattered. And they would have to remain there until the end. A suicide mission. Even the most resolute among the council flinched at the weight of such a fate. Sarnak's cruel laughter echoed across the comm channels, like chains scraping cold metal, drinking in their despair with malicious delight. Such a small price, he purred, to bring a world to its knees. The Eldar of Bealtan stood at a terrible crossroads. To halt the converging hive fleets, Doriel had to be sacrificed. Their finest farcers would have to become martyrs in a ritual of annihilation. But a ritual could not unfold in silence. It required blood and steel to buy time. And in this war, time was the most precious weapon of all. Once again, the sword wind assembled, their banners snapping fiercely in the biting winds of Doriel's shattered skies. Graph tanks roared to life, engines thrumming with deadly purpose. The war host steeled itself to plunge back into a world already scarred, its surface a battlefield of ash and ruin, half swallowed by the unrelenting swarm. But fate, ever cruel, had spun a darker web beneath their feet. High in the jagged peaks of the razor-edge Valley of the Gods, an ancient secret had been shattered. An Eldar webway portal, one of the most sacred and hidden gateways in all their lore, had been broken open. In their desperate withdrawal, amidst the chaos of reorganization and bloodied skirmishes, the Eldar forces of Bealtan had failed to seal this most hallowed threshold. Though they had fought like the very children of Kain incarnate, rending the skies with psychic fire and choking the valleys with venomous storms, they had grown blind to the mountain's vulnerability. They had believed the past secure. They were grievously mistaken. From the depths of shadow emerged a monstrous mind, a swarm lord, ancient, cunning, and driven by a primal, genetic fury older than the stars themselves. It rallied the shattered fragments of the Kraken splinter fleets. Like a living storm, it drove them toward the exposed portal. When the Eldar defenders faltered and retreated, the Tyranids surged forward in a tide of chitin and hunger. They poured through the shimmering gateway in swarms, hundreds at a time, a flood of ravenous life spilling into the sacred mountain. The witch cults of strife roared into action, launching themselves aboard sleek gravcraft. Their raiders wove through the air like deadly specters, casting splinter fire and crackling dark light lances into the endless ranks of the invaders. Acrobatic and lethal, the Wyches carved through the first waves with razor-sharp precision. But the swarm was inexhaustible. For every Tyranid torn down, two more took its place. A piercing psychic shriek tore through the webway tunnels, a scream of desecration and terror. The unthinkable had happened. The Eldar's most sacred domain had been violated. In the crystal-lit halls of Biltan, the Farseers gathered in grim council, shadows heavy with despair. The news reached them swiftly, and far beyond, deep within the shimmering labyrinths of the webway. The warriors of Craftworld Iyanden prepared to answer the call. Yet when Iyanden's forces opened the final portal to Doriel, their hopes shattered. A living wall of ravenous tyranids barred their path, claws tearing the very fabric of reality, eyes blazing with hunger. The first assault of Iyanden, silent, precise, and masked in death's calm, was forced to withdraw, grinding back under the relentless pressure. The once sacred corridors of travel had become a crucible of war. It was then that Autarch Take Silvereye spoke the command that would turn the tide. Unleash the ghost warriors. From the shadowed depths of Iyanden arose the Wraith host, towering sentinels of Wraithbone, their hollow forms cradling the souls of fallen Eldar. Immune to pain, fear, and the savage claws of their tyrannid foes, these spectral titans advanced with relentless precision, their blades singing silent death. They formed a living wall, locking tunnel after tunnel against the ravenous tide. Yet even these colossal constructs were not impervious. Enormous carnifexes, monstrous beasts as large as grav tanks, smashed through their ranks with earth-shattering fury, reducing Wraithbone to splinters. Still, for every shattered guardian, another rose in its place, unyielding, inexorable. And from the pages of legend came the ultimate reckoning. The Phoenix Lords, 6 immortal warriors cloaked in myth and deadly grace, vaulted into the fray, weapons blazing with ancient power. They fought alongside Iyanden's Avatar of Kine, weaving a tapestry of death across the shattered peaks. Malgon R.A., his scythe spinning like a cyclone of wrath, cleaved through gaunts by the dozens. Jane Zar, peerless and swift, danced through the battlefield in a deadly blur, dueling twin hive tyrants, with blades singing agony and triumph. Baharath, silent as the shadowed sky, blinded beast after beast with piercing strikes, while Fugan burned his foes to ash with lances of pure, white-hot flame. The tide began to turn. Where once the tyrannid swarm had seemed unstoppable, now they faltered, pushed back inch by bloody inch. Slowly, painfully, and with unbreakable resolve, the ghost warriors and Phoenix Lords reclaimed the peaks of Doriel. But the battle was far from over. The war's dark heart still beat beneath the blood-soaked soil, and the swarm's hunger was endless. When the sword wind of Biltan returned to Doriel, the weight in their hearts was unbearable. This was no longer a living world. It was a shattered husk, a hollowed skeleton where once vibrant forests had danced beneath twin suns. The lush jewel of the void had been stripped bare, its life essence burned away, devoured, torn from root and marrow alike. All that lingered now were the Tyranids. The final act had unfurled, and Doriel was dying a slow, grotesque death. Once proud and teeming with life, the planet had become a festering wound, a bloated carcass drifting in the cold void. The valleys gaped open like festering sores, pools of writhing, corrosive fluid bubbling and hissing against the cracked crust. Clouds of alien toxins billowed from the massed spore beasts, shrouding the sky in a choking haze of decay and ruin. Eater swarms, nightmarish horrors forged in the genetic foundries of not one, but 2 ravenous hive fleets, scoured every shattered inch of the surface. They moved with relentless, insectal hunger, devouring biomass in ravenous waves before plunging into the seething digestion pools below. From these dark vats, a sickening slurry of consumed life was drawn upward through massive, pulsating spires of flesh and sinew, twisted bioconstructs that writhed like obscene tendrils reaching for the stars. From orbit, the grotesque columns resembled the grasping feelers of some celestial kraken, hungry for the very light of distant suns. Perched high above in the canopy of a jagged ridge, Autarch Sunspear observed the horrific spectacle with a grimness carved deep into his features. Those sprawling tendrils, each thick enough to engulf a grav tank whole, lay far beyond the reach of even his most valiant forces. They were guarded by a maelstrom of ravenous beasts, feral and unyielding, willing to hurl themselves into the jaws of death simply to stall any who dared approach. Time was running out. Mere hours remained before the red-stained pools ran dry, the last vestiges of life siphoned into the voracious alien engines below. Soon, Doriel would be nothing but dust and memory. Then, a whisper crackled over the comms. "Unusual contact, North Quadrant. You need to see this." The voice was tense, urgent, static crackling like the distant thunder of war. Scouts had discovered a trail, a grim breadcrumb path of tyrannid corpses, strewn in a desperate, chaotic line leading towards something vast, something alive, something unnatural. Without hesitation, Sunspear climbed aboard a nearby Falcon Graph tank. Its engine snarled, propelling him swiftly into the thick, toxin-laden skies. Behind him, a sleek formation of Eldar skimmers arranged into a deadly V, cutting through the noxious air like predatory birds of war. As the mound of dead came into view, Sunspear's eyes narrowed. A towering hill of shattered chitin and viscous ichor, a macabre monument to carnage. Tyrannid bodies lay heaped in grotesque piles, shattered limbs and broken carapaces telling a tale of violent passage. And at the summit, glowing like a furnace in the night, a living flame burned. The avatar of Kain. It moved with the inexorable fury of a vengeful god. Its legendary blade, the Suindoala, the Wailing Doom, cutting through the swarm in searing arcs of molten death. Each strike cleaved apart monstrous Molochs, crushed Tyrannid warriors' skulls in bursts of psychic blood, and tore through the swarm's flesh with fiery wrath. Though its form wept lava from countless wounds, the Avatar fought on, a blazing beacon of wrath and divine fury incarnate. Sunspear's battle cry tore through the comms. "This is our moment. Rally to the flame, to the Avatar." From the jagged heights of God Peak, the armies of Bealtan descended like a storm of retribution. Graph tanks screamed through sulphurous clouds, disgorging squads of aspect warriors whose war cries shattered the poisoned air. Blades gleamed like stars fallen to war as they secured the corpse mound, standing resolute. "Hold the line. Protect the seers." Meanwhile, within the cavernous hold of the Void-class cruiser Val's Caress, the Farseers moved with solemn purpose. In their hands rested the Fire Heart, now thrumming with eldritch power. Its ancient core pulsed a deep, blood-red glow that seeped like liquid fire into the earth beneath their feet. The psychic resonance rose, a deep, ominous heartbeat as the ritual commenced. And then, from the abyssal shadows, came the giants. From the shadow depths of the cruiser's vast lower bays, the Titans emerged, colossal behemoths wrought of wraithbone and ancient might, engines of devastation that echoed the glory of Eldar legends. Leading this thunderous host was the Phantom Titan, its ghostly armor shimmering faintly beneath the veil of hollow energy fields, its towering helm ablaze with the gleam of ancestral gold, a crown forged in the fires of countless wars. Flanking it, two revenant Titans moved with a spectral elegance, their steps measured yet fluid, as though war itself had shaped their very souls. Above, the heavens erupted into a symphony of motion. Sleek dark Eldar graphcraft streaked through the clouds like obsidian knives, swift and deadly predators hunting the toxic air. Black-winged scourges sliced the skies in wicked circles, their cries a cruel herald of the carnage to come. Among them darted the vivid harlequin venoms, their hulls alive with swirling patterns of laughter and madness, painted in the mercurial colors of Segarak. The laughing god, the trickster of fate. Atop God Peak, the webway portal flared to life, a sudden, blazing star in the twilight, vomiting relentless waves of Eldar reinforcements. They poured forth, warriors of blade and lance, eyes burning with fire, hearts forged in vengeance. The Fire Heart would be awakened. Doriel was destined to burn, no matter the price. The assault unfolded like a deadly ballet, precise, brutal, unrelenting. For a precious moment, the Tyrannid staggered, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught. But the hive mind stirred. It awakened, and it roared. Across the ravaged valleys, the monstrous tide writhed and surged, an unholy river of flesh and hunger that blotted out the sky. The first wave thundered forward like an unstoppable deluge. Carnifex broods crashed into the Eldar lines with the force of avalanches, their earth-shaking steps pulverizing bone and sinew, shredding warriors in a blood-drenched tide of destruction. Behind them lumbered Tyrannifexes, their biocannons spewing caustic acid fire that hissed and burned through Eldar armor. unstoppable engines of annihilation. Above, the battle raged in the skies. Dark Eldar reavers twisted and weaved in deadly duels with monstrous hive crones, their splinter rifles sowing death into wings of living flesh. On the flanks, Harlequins danced a grim dance of blades and claws against swarming packs of Genestealers, their fight a savage performance of grace and lethal precision. Shuriken rifles spat, blades sang, and blood stained the air. Beneath it all, the ground trembled with the pulse of the fire heart. The seers, bound in trance, poured their psychic might into the ancient relic. Their minds wove together in a seamless ritual older than the stars, channeling the fury and finality of doom itself. The rhythmic thrum of the Fireheart's core grew deeper, louder, an unholy heartbeat ready to rend the world asunder. The moment had come. Doriel would scream its last, and the galaxy would remember. Even in the twilight of their fading empire, the Eldar were still gods of war. To the south, 3 towering hive tyrants advanced with unerring precision, their monstrous forms cutting a path of devastation through the scarred battlefield. Encircling these towering warlords like a living, chitinous shield were endless swarms of ravenous bridlings. These relentless vermin bore the full fury of the Eldar's counterattacks, absorbing splinter fire and shuriken blasts with nightmarish tenacity, allowing their masters to march forward unbroken. Above, gleaming aspect warriors streaked across the battlefield like streaks of silver lightning. Mounted on sleek graph skimmers, they danced through the thick haze of war with lethal grace, their lances flashing like bolts of pure light, piercing any creature foolish enough to linger in the open. Their movements were a blur, a deadly tempest of speed and precision. On the jagged rocky slopes, savage battalions of witches engaged in a brutal, unyielding contest of blades and blood with squat, snarling brood beasts. Their shimmering weapons carved brutal arcs through the alien flesh, each strike a calculated act of deadly artistry. Close by, succubi twisted and vaulted with predatory elegance, their lithe forms weaving in perfect harmony against the serpentine hunger of tyrannids erupting from fissures in the cracked earth below. The very soil seemed alive, trembling and rupturing under the ceaseless onslaught of monstrous foes rising in wave after wave. To the east, the ground itself shuddered beneath the approach of a nightmare made flesh, the colossal Hierophant Biotitan. It emerged from the grotesque forest of pulsating capillary towers like a harbinger of doom, each thunderous step shaking the earth with primal menace. Its massive, sinewy limbs slammed and jabbed forward, carving a relentless path straight toward the heart of the Eldar defense. From the rear, the Phantom Titan broke formation from its revenant guardians and surged into the fray. Its weapon systems unleashed a devastating barrage of pulsar blasts and shrieking sonic lances, tearing gaping, smoking wounds in the Bio-Titan's chitinous armor. The battle turned into a titanic duel of fire and fury, each blow met with unyielding ferocity. The Bio-Titan responded with a deafening, guttural roar, hurling a volley of burning, corrosive biological sludge in retaliation. One Revenant Titan was engulfed in the acidic torrent, its systems violently ravaged until it collapsed in a cascade of sparks and smoldering ruin. The confrontation degenerated into a brutal stalemate, 2 colossal forces locked in merciless combat, while the field beneath them grew ever more littered with the fallen. Yet even amid this cataclysmic struggle, a darker shadow weighed upon Autarch Sunspear's mind. At the foothills of God Peak, titanic broods from the Hive Fleet's Leviathan and Kraken swarmed in unending waves, pressing down on the Guardian war host sworn to shield the Eldar Farseer Council. These mystics labored feverishly, their minds focused on awakening the Fire Heart, a weapon of terrible ancient power, capable of reshaping or destroying the world itself. The Tyrannid assault struck with brutal cunning and devastating force. Kraken's splinter fleet had bided their time patiently, lurking in the shadows until the slightest breach appeared in the Eldar lines. Seizing the opportunity, they surged forward like a living tide of destruction, overwhelming the defenders with sheer numbers and savage ferocity. No reinforcements were possible. Every Eldar warrior, every ally, was locked in desperate, savage combat, grappling in the choking melee against the relentless Tyrannid horde. The fate of the Fireheart's activation hung by the thinnest thread. If the Guardians faltered even for a moment, the fragile hope of salvation would shatter, and all would be lost. The Eldar fought with unyielding ferocity, the disciplined volleys of shuriken fire carving deadly arcs through the relentless Tyranid swarm. Each burst thinned the alien tide, but the true peril loomed larger. A colossal hive tyrant, monstrous and merciless, directing the carnage with cold intellect and savage fury. It charged forward like a living tempest, its four gleaming bones words flashing with lethal precision, slicing through armor, shields, and bone alike, leaving devastation in its wake. Under the tyrant's merciless gaze, the seers conducting the Fireheart's sacred ritual began to falter. Their psychic focus wavered as tendrils of dread crept into their minds, threatening to unravel centuries-old rites. The ritual teetered on the edge of collapse, until the commanding voice of Autarch TX Silver Eye thundered through the chaos. His words struck like thunderbolts, steadying wavering spirits and anchoring their resolve, buying precious moments against the encroaching nightmare. Then, reality itself seemed to tear apart. From the monstrous form of the hive tyrant, swirling, rippling rifts burst open, like grotesque irises blossoming within its chitinous flesh. Violent eruptions of ichor and shattered bone exploded outward, fracturing the abomination from within. The creature's roar turned to a shattered scream as it was sundered by a force unseen. From the ethereal portal crowning Gapik emerged the spectral warriors of Craftworld Iyanden. Ghostly and insubstantial, they glided forward like harbingers of death, silent, deadly, unstoppable. Their ghost cannons tore through the largest Tyranids with a terrifying clarity, while Hemlock Wraith fighters streaked through the war-torn skies, their distortion scythes slicing down swarms of smaller creatures with preternatural precision. Wraith Lords strode boldly into the heart of the Tyranid masses, their ghost glaives flashing in deadly arcs, cleaving through chitin and sinew with an otherworldly grace that defied mortal comprehension. Behind them, Wraith Knights unleashed punishing volleys from sun cannons and heavy wraith cannons, picking off synapse beasts with ruthless accuracy. Above, screeching gargoyles flailed impotently, their savage attacks dissolving against ghostly forms as if striking smoke. To the Tyranids, these spectral warriors were no mere foes. They were nightmares made flesh, fleeting phantoms whose existence mocked the very laws of reality. Yet they were real enough to buy the Farseers the time they so desperately needed. Finally, the Fireheart pulsed with an infernal light, its nodes flaring crimson like a beacon of wrath. The planet convulsed violently beneath them, cracks spiderwebbed across Doriel's surface, tearing open as torrents of superheated steam hissed and roared from 1,000 fissures. Towering columns of molten rock erupted skyward, spewing fire and ash in roaring plumes that darkened the heavens. The planet itself screamed in agony. Chaos engulfed the battlefield. The earth shattered into jagged, shifting plates, gaping wide to reveal searing rivers of molten lava. Entire broods of Tyranids were swept into the fiery maelstrom, their agonized screams evaporating into the roar of the flames that devoured them whole. Yet the swarm refused to yield. Fueled by maddened desperation, the Tyranids surged onward, throwing themselves recklessly into the inferno and the fray alike. Their howls of fury and pain echoed as they sought to overwhelm the Eldar's dwindling forces. Those Eldar who still stood on the shattered surface fought with the wrath of kind burning in their hearts. They leapt across widening fissures with death-defying grace, blades flashing as they struck down foes amidst the chaos. Not all would survive the hellscape. Swaths of earth collapsed without warning, swallowing warriors and beasts into the seething depths below. And God Peak itself roared with unnatural fury, its ancient volcanic heart shattered, erupting in a cataclysmic triple pillar of blazing white-hard lava, an immense pyroclastic column that surged upward, blotting out the sky and rolling outward like a living storm of fire and ash. The fiery tempest engulfed the flanks of the mountain, transforming the battlefield into an infernal realm of flame and wrath where only the strongest could endure. Across the smoke-choked skies, the dark Eldar allies of the Craftworlders tore through the air like lethal phantoms, razor-winged raiders slicing the fiery haze with savage grace. Their sleek graph skimmers moved in jagged arcs, blades flashing, plasma-scorched trails marking their furious path. Beneath them, deep within the planet's tortured crust, the ancient fire heart thrummed with a dark portent, its ominous heartbeat pulsing beneath Doriel's shattered surface. Retreat was their dance, but never surrender. When monstrous tyrannid horrors erupted from the boiling ground, the raiders did not hesitate. With merciless precision, they spiraled back into the fray, their blades whirling in a deadly ballet, tearing into the alien abominations. Victorious, they snared the writhing carcasses in towering cages etched with eldritch runes, ancient wards glowing faintly as the captured beasts twitched helplessly, suspended from their transports like trophies of war. Below, the world was unraveling. Rivers of molten rock surged and hissed, devouring hundreds of Eldar warriors in a molten symphony of agony. Their cries were swallowed by the planet's fiery blood, a brutal echo of the tyrannid digestion cycle, twisted, distorted by the cataclysm consuming Doriel. The chaos stretched to the heavens. Above, the colossal bioships hung in orbit like obscene predators, their ribbed capillary tendrils pulsating wildly. These grotesque tubes plunged down to the surface, greedily siphoning the horrid harvest of biomass, twisted remnants from the collision of High Fleet Leviathan and High Fleet Kraken. Bloodied and seething, this foul mixture was drawn upward in surging waves of corrosive sludge toward the monstrous ships awaiting their grim feast. Autarch Wartarch Sunspear's sharp voice cut through the turmoil, his gaze locked on the ribbed tendrils entwined with the churning digestion pools, recognizing the terrible truth. The tendrils were siphoning a blended biomass, an unholy fusion of two High Fleets dead and dying, which, in the wrong hands, could birth an entirely new breed of lethal, nightmarish bioconstructs. Victory, it seemed, had slipped from the Eldar grasp, stolen in the final cruel moments. But then, like a thunderclap ripping through the infernal skies, supersonic engines screamed into life. Sunspear's eyes snapped upward to behold the sudden arrival of jagged-winged fighter squadrons, sleek and deadly as the talons of some mechanical raptor. They sliced through the volcanic storms and rivers of molten rock, their monomolecular wing blades shimmering faintly in the fiery haze, glinting like shards of glass poised to shatter. With ruthless precision, the fighters plunged upon the towering capillary veins, their blades carving through the grotesque organic tubes with surgical grace. One by one, the towering towers ruptured, exploding in geysers of bleeding, corrosive ichor that sprayed like severed arteries, spilling the tyrannid's stolen lifeblood into the burning air. Sunspear laughed aloud, a sound rich with disbelief and triumph. The bioships of Leviathan had been robbed of their prize. Amidst the planet's collapse, the Tyranids could no longer reclaim their harvest. With the mission fulfilled, Autarch Sunspear gave the order to withdraw. The thorn-patterned gravcraft of the Swordwind fleet rose like swarming hornets, streaking toward the sanctuary of the Void-class cruiser Vol's Caress, their silhouettes fading into the fiery smoke of a dying world. But the war extended far beyond the burning surface of Doriel. High above the battle, Craftworld Iandan's fleet made its mark. Grand Admiral Prince Yerl, a strategist known as much for audacity as brilliance, had launched a daring assault on the splinter fleet of High Fleet Kraken. His strike, reckless to some but calculated with deadly foresight, tore through the enemy's ranks with unrelenting fury, a reminder that the Eldar fight on every front, and every victory, no matter how small, is a shard of hope amidst the darkness. Harnessing the bitter lessons carved from past battles at Iandan, Prince Yerl steered his commanders with ruthless precision, each order sharp as a blade, each maneuver a calculated strike in the deadly dance of war. The cost was severe. Many of his eldritch raiders and stalwart vessels of the Iandan Armada burned bright and fell, but their sacrifice shattered the splinter fleet of Kraken utterly, leaving no bioship to flee the carnage. As the last grotesque vessels of the Hive fleet convulsed in their death throes, they spewed forth torrents of vile, twitching organisms upon Dariel's shattered surface. Yet, these abominations found no refuge. The planet's fractured crust roared and ruptured, rivers of molten lava tearing through the wreckage and swallowing the monstrous spawn before they could even draw breath. The splinter fleet was obliterated. The world of Dariel, a forsaken jewel battered first by the cold iron fist of the Imperium, then ravaged mercilessly by the endless tyrannid swarms, had finally been broken, pushed beyond salvation by the merciless sons of Cain. Only the fire-seers of Beltan remained, their forms etched in ghostly light as they poured every ounce of their psychic essence into the ancient fire heart. Around them, the very atmosphere ignited, flames roaring and surging until the surface of the planet became a blazing pyre, a miniature sun in the void, casting its furious light for a fleeting moment before darkness would swallow it whole. Far above the inferno, the Eldar fleet slipped silently into the black vastness of deep space, leaving behind nothing but a world consumed by fire and fury. Within the shadowed sanctum of the Val's caress, Autarch Sunspear sat alone, his voice a whisper of ancient prayers to the gods of their fading race. His eyes, cold and distant, searched the void for an answer, a sign, a promise that Dariel's fiery doom would not be the fate of all Eldar. But silence was the only reply. Beneath the surface, deep within the twisting labyrinthine catacombs of Cormura, the succubus Lilith Hesperax unveiled her grisly trophies to the homunculi of the Ebon Sting Coven. 6 colossal cages, rune-carved and pulsating with arcane power, rattled open to reveal thrashing tyrannid monstrosities, 3 crimson as fresh blood, 3 bruised and mottled in the bruising shades of purple and black, as if torn from the bowels of nightmare itself. The homunculi's cold, clinical scrutiny confirmed Lilith's darkest hope. These savage warriors could be fused, twisted, and combined to spawn a new strain of abomination. Their breeding vats, vast and humming with dark energy, were more than capable of nurturing such a creation. Soon, these nightmarish hybrids would reign supreme within Camorra's brutal arenas, terrifying the crowds and enthralling them with deadly spectacle for countless cycles to come. From the shadows stepped a regal harlequin, grace incarnate, enigmatic as a living shadow. With a playful flourish, he blew a theatrical kiss to Lilith, then bowed deeply before dissolving back into the darkness. "Preparations must begin," he murmured, his voice smooth as silk and sharp as a dagger. And so, in the hidden corners of the galaxy, the wheels of dark and terrible schemes began to turn once more.